In a mid-sized city known for its vibrant culture and tight-knit neighborhoods, Lieutenant Maya Reynolds was enjoying some rare downtime. A decorated military officer with years of service under her belt, she had earned respect and admiration from her peers in the armed forces. But this week she wasn't commanding troops or strategizing missions. She was back home, reconnecting with family and savoring the simple pleasures of civilian life. Her hometown was where her roots lay, and it still felt like the safest place on earth to her. Maya's evening began like any other. She had spent the day catching up with relatives, laughing over old stories, and indulging in her favorite home-cooked meals. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, she decided to take a quiet drive through the neighborhood. The streets were alive with activity, children playing on sidewalks, couples walking their dogs, and shopkeepers closing up for the night. It was peaceful, almost nostalgic, a reminder of simpler times before her demanding career took her far away. As she drove past the local pharmacy, something unusual caught her eye. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. At first glance, it seemed odd but not alarming. Pharmacies rarely closed late, especially in this part of town. But then she noticed movement inside, a shadow darting between shelves, hurried and furtive. Maya slowed down her car, squinting to get a better look. That's when she saw him. A man wearing a hoodie, his face partially obscured, stuffing items into a backpack. His actions left little doubt. He wasn't there to buy medicine. Her instincts kicked in immediately. Years of training had taught her to assess situations quickly and act decisively. This wasn't just about protecting property. Pharmacies stocked medications that could save lives. If stolen, those drugs could end up on the black market, endangering countless people. Maya knew she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Pulling over to the curb, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Her voice was calm but firm as she reported the incident, providing details about the location and describing the suspect. While waiting for law enforcement to arrive, Maya realized time was critical. Every second counted if they hoped to catch the thief red-handed. She glanced around, noting the absence of patrol cars despite the urgency of her call. Frustration bubbled within her. How long would it take for backup to show up? By then, the suspect might vanish without a trace. After a brief internal debate, she made a decision, slipping her sidearm into its holster, a precautionary measure drilled into her during basic training. She stepped out of her car and began following the suspect at a safe distance. The chase led her deeper into the labyrinthine alleys behind the main street. Streetlights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows on cracked pavement. The air smelled faintly of damp concrete and garbage. Despite the unsettling surroundings, Maya remained focused. She kept her eyes locked on the figure ahead, careful not to lose sight of him. Occasionally, she whispered updates into her phone, keeping dispatch informed of her movements. "I'm pursuing the suspect on foot," she said clearly. "He's heading east toward Jefferson Avenue." What Maya didn't realize was how quickly circumstances could shift. In her mind, she was doing exactly what she'd been trained to do, staying alert, gathering intel, and assisting law enforcement. But, to anyone watching from afar, especially someone unfamiliar with her background, her actions might have appeared ambiguous. Dressed casually but carrying herself with authority, she radiated confidence. And though she repeatedly identified herself as Lieutenant Reynolds, explaining her role in the situation, her presence raised questions among those who didn't fully understand her intentions. Unbeknownst to Maya, danger loomed closer than she imagined. Dispatch had relayed her description to responding officers, but key details got lost in translation. Instead of recognizing her as an ally, a fellow protector of justice, they prepared for the worst-case scenario, an armed individual involved in criminal activity. None of them stopped to consider that the woman chasing the suspect might be trying to help. All they heard was armed and pursuit. To them, that was enough reason to approach with caution and potentially lethal force. As Maya pressed forward, adrenaline surged through her veins. Each step brought her closer, to apprehending the suspect, yet farther from the safety she once took for granted. Little did she know, her pursuit would soon collide head-on with deeply ingrained biases and systemic flaws lurking beneath the surface of law enforcement. What started as a noble attempt to stop a crime was about to spiral into something far more complex and devastating than she ever anticipated. The alleyway grew darker and narrower as Maya followed the suspect, her footsteps echoing softly against the walls. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained sharp. Years of military training had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, even when the stakes were high. She kept her distance, careful not to spook the man ahead of her. Every few seconds she glanced over her shoulder, hoping to see flashing police lights or hear the sound of sirens. But the streets remained eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of garbage cans knocked over by stray cats. The suspect seemed to sense he was being followed. He quickened his pace, glancing nervously behind him as he turned another corner. Maya adjusted her stride, staying just far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to keep him in sight. "Dispatch, I'm still in pursuit," she whispered into her phone, her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. "Suspect is heading north now, moving fast. Please advise on backup status." Her words went unanswered. The silence on the other end of the line was unnerving, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. This wasn't the first dangerous situation she'd faced, though it felt different somehow. Out here, alone in the shadows of her own hometown, the rules weren't as clear-cut as they were during military operations. There were no comrades beside her, no chain of command guiding her actions. It was just her, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. As she rounded another bend in the alley, the suspect suddenly stopped. For a moment, Maya froze, unsure of what to expect. Was he setting a trap? Did he realize she was following him? She crouched slightly, ready to react if needed, her hand instinctively hovering near her holstered sidearm. But instead of confronting her, the man simply paused to adjust the strap of his backpack before sprinting off again. Maya exhaled slowly, grateful for the brief reprieve, and resumed her pursuit. The chase led them deeper into an industrial part of town, where warehouses loomed like silent giants against the night sky. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal, and the ground beneath her feet shifted from cracked pavement to gravel. Maya's shoes crunched loudly with each step, making it harder to move quietly. She cursed under her breath, knowing the noise could give away her position. Still, she pressed on, unwilling to let the suspect slip away. It was then that she heard it, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the stillness. Relief washed over her as she realized help was finally on the key. Way. "Dispatch, I hear sirens approaching," she said into her phone, her tone tinged with hope. "I'm currently in the industrial district near the old shipping yard. Suspect is approximately 50 yards ahead of me." But relief quickly gave way to unease. As the sirens grew louder, 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the entrance of the alley. Their headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the narrow passageway like a spotlight. Maya raised her free hand, waving to signal her location. "Over here," she called out, her voice loud and clear. "I'm Lieutenant Reynolds. I've been pursuing the suspect." For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The officers stared at her, their expressions unreadable behind the glare of their flashlights. Maya stood tall, trying to project confidence and authority. She knew how important it was to establish trust in situations like this. "I'm one of you," she repeated, her voice firm. "I called this in earlier. The suspect is up ahead. He's armed and dangerous." Her words hung in the air unanswered. Instead of lowering their weapons or acknowledging her explanation, the officers exchanged wary glances. One of them, a young man with a nervous twitch, kept his gun trained on her, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Maya's stomach tightened as she noticed the hesitation in their movements. Something wasn't right. She tried again, speaking slowly and deliberately to ensure there was no misunderstanding. "Listen, I'm Lieutenant Maya Reynolds. I'm active duty military, currently on leave. I reported this incident to dispatch about 10 minutes ago. I'm here to assist. You need to focus on apprehending the suspect before he gets away." Despite her efforts, the officers showed no signs of relaxing. If anything, their body language became more tense. Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play here, something beyond mere caution or protocol. She glanced down at herself, wondering if her appearance was causing confusion. Dressed in jeans and a casual jacket, she looked nothing like a uniformed officer. But surely her repeated identification and cooperation should have been enough to ease their suspicions. Then it hit her. It wasn't just her clothes, it was her skin color. In the harsh glow of the headlights, she saw the subtle shift in their demeanor, the slight narrowing of eyes, the stiffening of posture. They weren't seeing Lieutenant Maya Reynolds, decorated military officer and protector of justice. They were seeing a black woman holding a weapon, standing in a dark alley late at night. And in that moment, bias, not reason, was dictating their response. Maya swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain composed. She had faced prejudice before, both in the military and in civilian life, but never in such a volatile situation. The weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed the emotions aside. Now wasn't the time to dwell on injustice. She needed to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled out of control. "I'm putting my hands up," she announced, raising both arms slowly to show she posed no threat. "I'm unarmed except for my holstered sidearm, which I'm not reaching for. My ID is in my pocket. I'll retrieve it carefully if you'd like to verify who I am." Her voice was calm but laced with urgency. "Please, we don't have much time. The suspect is getting away." Still, the officers hesitated. One of them barked commands into his radio, relaying vague details about an armed individual in the vicinity. Maya winced at the description, knowing full well how misleading it was. She wasn't a threat, she was an ally. But the label carried weight, especially in moments like this when fear and adrenaline clouded judgment. The standoff stretched on, each second feeling longer than the last. Maya's mind raced as she tried to think of another way to bridge the gap between them. She thought about mentioning her medals, her years of service, the lives she had saved, but none of that mattered here. Not when preconceived notions held more sway than facts. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement. The suspect, sensing an opportunity, had doubled back while everyone was distracted. He darted past the patrol cars, disappearing, into the maze of alleys once again. Maya's heart sank as she realized the window for catching him had closed. All because of a misunderstanding, one rooted not in logic, but in deeply ingrained biases that refused to yield to reason. As the officers finally began advancing toward her, their weapons still drawn, Maya felt a surge of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She had done everything right, followed protocol, identified herself, and prioritized public safety. Yet here she was, treated not as a hero, but as a potential villain. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She had dedicated her life to protecting others, only to find herself caught in the crosshairs of mistrust and fear. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. The tension in the alleyway was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Maya stood frozen, her hands raised high above her head as the officers approached with caution etched into every step they took. Their flashlights blinded her, creating halos of light that obscured their faces but did nothing to soften the coldness of their weapons pointed directly at her chest. Despite her calm demeanor, she could feel her pulse racing, each heartbeat pounding like a drum in her ears. Her mind raced, trying to calculate how this situation had spiraled so far out of control. "I'm Lieutenant Reynolds," she repeated once more, her voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside her. "I called this in. I'm here to help. You need to focus on the suspect." Her words echoed through the narrow passageway, bouncing off the brick walls and fading into silence. But the officers didn't seem to hear her, or if they did, they chose not to acknowledge it. Instead, one of them barked another command into his radio, his tone clipped and urgent. Maya's eyes darted between the two men, searching for any sign of recognition or understanding. She noticed the younger officer, the one whose hand trembled slightly around the grip of his gun, seemed particularly uneasy. His gaze flickered between her face and the holster at her side, where her sidearm rested securely. It wasn't drawn, hadn't been touched since she arrived, yet its mere presence seemed to unnerve him further. "Ma'am, lower your hands slowly and step back," he ordered, his voice shaking almost imperceptibly. Maya hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying, moving deliberately to avoid alarming them further. As she brought her arms down, she locked eyes with him, hoping to convey reassurance rather than hostility. "I'm not a threat," she said firmly, enunciating each word carefully. "You're making a mistake." But her plea fell on deaf ears. The other officer, a grizzled veteran with years of experience written across his weathered features, stepped forward, his weapon still trained on her. "Stay right there," he growled, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Don't move." Time seemed to slow as Maya processed what was happening. These men weren't seeing her for who she truly was: a decorated military officer, a protector, someone who had sworn an oath to serve and defend. To them, she was just another black woman standing in a dark alley with a gun. And in that moment, none of her accomplishments mattered. Not her rank, not her service record, not even her desperate attempts to explain herself. All that mattered was the color of her skin and the weapon holstered at her hip. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Another patrol car had arrived, its headlights flooding the area with blinding brightness. More officers spilled out, their weapons drawn as they surrounded her. Maya felt a wave of panic rising within her, but she forced herself to stay composed. She couldn't afford to lose control now, not when every movement, every word could be misinterpreted as aggression. "Listen to me," she shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony of commands being shouted by the officers. "I'm Lieutenant Maya Reynolds. I've been pursuing a suspect who broke into a pharmacy. He's armed and dangerous, and he's getting away because you're focused on me instead of doing your job." Her words hung in the air unanswered. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of doubt cross one of the officers' faces, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Instead, the tension escalated further. One of the newer arrivals, a burly man with a scowl etched onto his face, barked an order at her. "Put your hands on your head and get on your knees." Maya obeyed reluctantly, dropping to the ground with her hands clasped tightly behind her head. The gravel dug painfully into her knees, but she barely registered the discomfort. Her mind was consumed by disbelief and frustration. How had this happened? She had done everything right, reported the crime, identified herself, followed protocol, and yet here she was, kneeling in the dirt while the real criminal escaped. As she knelt there, her heart sank as she realized the suspect was long gone. Somewhere in the shadows, he was slipping away unnoticed, free to sell stolen medications or commit another crime. All because these officers had chosen to see her as a threat rather than an ally. The irony of the situation burned deep within, her fueling both anger and sadness. Then, without warning, the situation took a turn for the worse. One of the officers, the nervous young man who had been trembling earlier, shouted something unintelligible. Whether it was fear, adrenaline, or sheer panic, no one would ever know for sure. But in that split second, his finger tightened on the trigger. The crack of gunfire shattered the night, echoing loudly through the alleyway. Maya flinched instinctively, bracing herself for impact. Pain exploded in her shoulder as the bullet tore through her flesh, sending her sprawling onto the ground. A sharp cry escaped her lips as white-hot agony coursed through her body. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, all she could hear was the deafening ring of silence in her ears. Chaos erupted around her. Officers shouted conflicting orders, their voices overlapping in confusion. Someone screamed for medical assistance while others scrambled to secure the scene. Maya lay on the cold, hard ground, clutching her wounded shoulder as blood seeped through her fingers. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs, but she fought to stay conscious, knowing that giving in to the darkness wasn't an option. Through the haze of pain, she heard fragments of conversation. "What did you do?" One officer yelled at the shooter. "She said she was military." Another voice chimed in, frantic and defensive. I thought she was reaching for her gun. The excuses tumbled out in a jumble of panic and regret, but Maya barely registered them. Her focus was solely on staying alive. Paramedics arrived moments later, their movements swift and efficient as they assessed her injuries. They strapped a tourniquet around her arm to stop the bleeding and loaded her onto a stretcher. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Maya caught glimpses of the crowd that had gathered, neighbors peering out of windows, bystanders filming on their phones, some shouting angrily at the officers. The sight filled her with a strange mix of emotions, gratitude for the support, but also sorrow over the spectacle her ordeal had become. Before the ambulance doors closed, she locked eyes with one of the officers, the one who had pulled the trigger. His face was pale, his hands visibly shaking. For a fleeting moment, their gazes met, and Maya saw something unexpected in his expression: guilt. Whether it stemmed from remorse or fear of consequences, she couldn't tell, but it offered her a small measure of solace amidst the chaos. As the ambulance sped away, sirens wailing, Maya closed her eyes and let the darkness claim her. Her last thought before losing consciousness was a prayer for healing, for justice, and for change. Because even in her most vulnerable state, she knew this incident wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. The news of the shooting spread like wildfire. By morning, it dominated headlines across local and national media outlets. The story was shocking enough on its own: a decorated military officer shot by police while pursuing a criminal, but when details began to emerge about what had unfolded in that dark alleyway, outrage rippled through communities far beyond Maya's hometown. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags calling for justice, while protests erupted outside police headquarters, demanding accountability for the officers involved. Maya's family was the first to feel the weight of the tragedy. Her mother, Evelyn, sat in the hospital waiting room, clutching a tissue so tightly her knuckles turned white. She stared blankly at the floor, replaying snippets of phone calls and text messages she'd exchanged with Maya just hours before the incident. She sounded happy, Evelyn whispered to Maya's younger brother, Marcus, who sat beside her, his head buried in his hands. She was home, safe. When doctors finally emerged to update them, the news was grim but hopeful. Maya had lost a significant amount of blood, but surgery had successfully removed the bullet from her shoulder. Her condition was stable, though. Recovery would be long and painful. She's strong, one doctor assured them gently, sensing their despair. If anyone can pull through this, it's her. But physical wounds were only part of the battle Maya faced. As she drifted in and out of consciousness in the ICU, her mind replayed the events of that night over and over again. Each time, she relived the moment the officer's finger tightened on the trigger, the deafening crack of gunfire and the searing pain that followed. When she woke fully for the first time, groggy from medication, the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. Tears streamed down her face as she grappled with the injustice of it all. How could this have happened? Why hadn't they listened? Her family surrounded her bed, offering quiet words of comfort, but even their presence couldn't dull the sting of betrayal. For years, Maya had worked tirelessly to earn respect in spaces where people who looked like her often weren't given the benefit of the doubt. She had endured countless microaggressions, dismissive comments, and outright discrimination during her military career. But none of those experiences compared to the raw pain of being shot by the very people sworn to protect her. Outside the hospital walls, public sentiment grew increasingly volatile. Protesters gathered daily, holding signs that read "Justice for Lieutenant Reynolds" and "Black Lives Matter." Community leaders took to podiums, condemning the systemic racism and implicit biases that had led to yet another senseless act of violence against a black person. Faith groups organized vigils, lighting candles and praying for healing, not just for Maya, but for a broken system that allowed such tragedies to occur repeatedly. Meanwhile, investigators combed through evidence, including body cam footage from the officers involved. When portions of the video were released days later, The nation watched in horror. The footage showed Maya calmly identifying herself multiple times, explaining her role in pursuing the suspect, and cooperating fully with law enforcement. Yet the responding officers appeared hesitant to believe her, their actions driven more by fear than facts. The moment the gun discharge sent chills through viewers, sparking debates about racial profiling, police training, and the use of lethal force. For many, the video confirmed what they already suspected. Maya's race had played a pivotal role in how she was perceived and treated. Conversations shifted from individual accountability to broader issues of institutional bias within law enforcement. Experts weighed in, pointing out the dangers of stereotypes that equate blackness with criminality and authority with aggression. Advocacy organizations amplified Maya's story, using it as a rallying cry for reform. Back at home, Maya's family struggled to navigate the whirlwind of attention surrounding her case. Reporters camped outside their house, eager for statements or interviews. Friends and neighbors brought meals and offered support, but the constant spotlight made it hard to grieve privately. Marcus, who idolized his older sister, found himself lashing out in anger, first at schoolmates who joked about the shooting, then at strangers online who questioned whether Maya was truly innocent. Evelyn, usually soft-spoken and reserved, surprised everyone by stepping into the public eye. At a press conference organized by civil rights activists, she delivered an impassioned plea for change. "My daughter is not a statistic," Evelyn said, her voice trembling but resolute. "She is a hero, a woman who has dedicated her life to serving others. And yet, because of the color of her skin, she was treated like a criminal. We cannot let this stand. This must be a turning point." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with millions. Donations poured in to cover Maya's medical expenses, and volunteers helped organize rallies in cities across the country. Even some law enforcement agencies expressed regret, acknowledging the need for better communication and de-escalation strategies. But amidst the calls for justice, there were also voices of resistance. Critics argued that Maya should have stayed out of the situation entirely, questioning why she felt compelled to intervene. Others defended the officer who pulled the trigger, claiming he acted under extreme pressure. These arguments infuriated Maya, who listened to them from her hospital bed. Still too weak to speak publicly, she relied on her family and legal team to advocate on her behalf. Her attorneys filed formal complaints against the officers involved, demanding thorough investigations and transparency throughout the process. Meanwhile, internal reviews were launched to determine whether departmental policies had been violated. The road ahead promised to be long and arduous, filled with hearings, testimonies, and endless scrutiny. Despite the challenges, Maya found solace in unexpected places. Fellow veterans reached out to share stories of solidarity, reminding her that she wasn't alone in her fight. Women of color in leadership positions sent letters of encouragement, praising her courage and resilience. One particularly moving message came from a retired general who had served alongside Maya during her deployment overseas. "You've always stood tall in the face of adversity," he wrote. "Keep standing now. Your strength will inspire generations to come." As weeks passed, Maya slowly began to regain her strength. Physical therapy sessions became a daily ritual, each small victory, lifting her arm, gripping a pen, taking unassisted steps, fueling her determination to recover fully. Yet emotional healing proved far more elusive. Nightmares plagued her sleep, forcing her to relive the shooting over and over again. Counseling sessions provided some relief, but the trauma ran deep, rooted in layers of personal and systemic injustice. Through it all, Maya clung to one thought. She refused to let this tragedy define her. If anything, it had reignited her passion for advocacy. From her hospital bed, she began drafting speeches and collaborating with activists to craft policy proposals aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. She envisioned reforms focused on improved training for officers, mandatory bias education, and clearer protocols for civilian law enforcement interactions. Though she knew meaningful change wouldn't happen overnight, she believed persistence would eventually yield results. By the time she was discharged from the hospital, Maya's story had become a symbol of hope and resilience. It highlighted the urgent need for equity and accountability within law enforcement, sparking conversations that transcended geographic and cultural boundaries. While the legal proceedings against the officers remained uncertain, Maya chose to focus on what she could control, using her voice to push for progress. As she stepped out of the hospital doors for the first time, greeted by cheering supporters and flashing cameras, Maya squared her shoulders and raised her chin. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. After all, she had spent her entire life breaking barriers and defying odds. This chapter might have been written in pain and struggle, but she was determined to rewrite the ending one step at a time. The weeks that followed Maya's release from the hospital were a whirlwind of activity, both for her personally and for the broader movement her story had ignited. As she began the long process of physical rehabilitation, Maya also found herself thrust into the spotlight as a symbol of resilience and justice. Her name became synonymous with calls for reform, and her face appeared on banners at rallies across the country. But behind the public image of strength lay a woman grappling with deep emotional scars, determined to channel her pain into purpose. Maya's first public appearance after leaving the hospital was at a community forum organized by local activists. The event took place in a packed auditorium where hundreds of people gathered to hear her speak. When Maya walked onto the stage, her arms still in a sling, her steps slow but steady, the room erupted in applause. For several moments she stood silently, taking in the sea of faces before her. Some were familiar, friends, family members, fellow veterans. Others were strangers, united by shared outrage over what had happened to her. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today under these circumstances," Maya began, her voice soft but steady. "When I put on my uniform, I did so with pride, knowing I was part of something bigger than myself. I believed in the ideals we fought for: justice, equality, freedom. But when I stepped into that alleyway, I realized how fragile those ideals can be." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or wiped away tears. She recounted the events of that night, not just the shooting itself, but the moments leading up to it. She spoke about the frustration of waiting for backup, the confusion when officers failed to recognize her authority, and the terror of realizing their fear outweighed reason. Her account was raw and unfiltered, painting a vivid picture of an experience no one should have to endure. But Maya didn't stop there. Instead of dwelling solely on her trauma, she shifted the conversation toward solutions. "This isn't just about me," she emphasized, her tone growing firmer. "It's about every person who has ever been judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. It's about dismantling systems that allow bias to dictate outcomes. And it's about holding ourselves accountable, not just as individuals, but as a society." Her speech struck a chord, earning widespread praise and reigniting discussions about police reform. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to push for legislative changes, drafting bills aimed at addressing implicit bias, improving officer training, and increasing transparency in law enforcement practices. Maya became a key figure in these efforts, lending her voice and expertise to panels, hearings, and town hall meetings. Despite her injuries, she traveled extensively, meeting with lawmakers, community leaders, and grassroots organizers to build momentum for change. However, progress came slowly, and often painfully. Legal proceedings against the officers involved dragged on, bogged down by procedural delays and conflicting testimonies. Internal investigations revealed lapses in communication and adherence to protocol, but accountability remained elusive. The officer who fired the shot claimed he acted out of fear for his life, citing Maya's holstered sidearm as justification. His defense team argued that the chaotic nature of the situation left him with little time to assess whether she posed a real threat. To many, this explanation felt like an excuse, a way to sidestep responsibility for a preventable tragedy. Public anger simmered, boiling over during court hearings where protesters gathered outside, chanting slogans and holding signs demanding justice. Inside the courtroom, Maya sat stoically beside her attorneys, listening intently as witnesses testified and evidence was presented. Each day brought new challenges, testing her patience and resolve. Yet she refused to back down, drawing strength from the support of those around her. At home, Maya leaned heavily on her family to navigate the emotional toll of the case. Evelyn, once hesitant to engage publicly, emerged as a fierce advocate for her daughter, speaking at rallies and writing op-eds about the need for systemic change. Marcus channeled his anger into activism, organizing student-led protests and raising awareness among his peers. Together, they formed a tight-knit support system, reminding Maya that she wasn't fighting alone. Amidst the legal battles and advocacy work, Maya also focused on healing. Physical therapy sessions became a form of meditation, allowing her to reclaim control over her body while processing the trauma she had endured. Counseling helped her confront feelings of betrayal and anger, teaching her coping mechanisms to manage anxiety and flashbacks. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her sense of self-worth, refusing to let bitterness consume her. One particularly transformative moment came when Maya reconnected with other survivors of police violence. Through a support group facilitated by civil rights organizations, she met men and women whose stories mirrored her own. They shared experiences of loss, resilience, and hope, creating a safe space to discuss the complexities of navigating a world that often dismissed their humanity. These connections reminded Maya that she was part of a larger community, one bound together by shared struggles and aspirations for a better future. As months passed, Maya's advocacy expanded beyond policing reform to encompass broader issues affecting marginalized communities. She partnered with initiatives focused on education equity, economic empowerment, and healthcare access, recognizing that true justice required addressing root causes of inequality. Her military background gave her unique credibility, bridging divides between traditionally opposing groups and fostering collaboration where none had existed before. Despite setbacks and frustrations, Maya remained steadfast in her mission. She understood that meaningful change wouldn't happen overnight, but she believed persistence would eventually yield results. Her optimism inspired others to join the fight, amplifying calls for reform and keeping pressure on decision-makers. Even critics who initially dismissed her efforts began to take notice, acknowledging the power of her message and the depth of her commitment. By the end of the year, tangible progress began to emerge. Several cities implemented pilot programs designed to improve civilian law enforcement interactions, including mandatory de-escalation training and independent oversight boards. Lawmakers introduced legislation targeting discriminatory practices within police departments, though passage remained uncertain. Meanwhile, grassroots campaigns gained traction, mobilizing voters and influencing policy agendas at local, state, and national levels. For Maya, these victories, however small, were proof that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, she found solace in knowing she had sparked a movement that extended far beyond her personal experience. Every rally, every policy proposal, every conversation sparked by her story represented a step toward a more equitable society. As she prepared for another round of legal proceedings, Maya reflected on how far she had come since that fateful night in the alleyway. She thought about the countless individuals who had rallied behind her cause, the lives touched by her advocacy, and the legacy she hoped to leave for future generations. There was still much work to be done, but Maya faced the challenge with unwavering determination. After all, she had always been a fighter, and this battle she knew was worth winning. The years that followed Maya's shooting were marked by both triumphs and setbacks, but through it all, her story became a beacon of hope for countless individuals fighting for justice. What began as a personal tragedy evolved into a national movement, one that transcended borders and inspired people from all walks of life to demand accountability and equity in law enforcement. Though the legal outcome of her case remained unresolved, its impact rippled far beyond courtroom walls, leaving an indelible mark on society. In the end, the officer who shot Maya was not convicted of criminal charges, a verdict that sparked outrage among activists and supporters. Prosecutors argued that proving intent to harm was nearly impossible given the circumstances, while defense attorneys claimed their client had acted within the bounds of his training. For many, the decision felt like yet another example of systemic failure, reinforcing the belief that true justice often eluded marginalized communities. But Maya refused to let despair define her response. Instead, she framed the ruling as a call to action, urging others to channel their frustration into meaningful change. "I won't lie. It hurts," Maya admitted during a press conference, held shortly after the verdict. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotions she worked so hard to keep under control. "But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about ensuring no one else has to go through what I did. If we give up now, then they've already won." Her resilience galvanized supporters, reigniting protests and petitions aimed at holding institutions accountable. Grassroots organizations doubled down on their efforts, organizing marches, educational workshops, and voter registration drives. Lawmakers, feeling mounting pressure from constituents, introduced sweeping reforms targeting police misconduct, racial bias, and transparency in investigations. Some measures faced resistance, but others gained traction, leading to tangible changes in policies across multiple states. One of the most significant victories came when federal guidelines were updated to mandate comprehensive bias training for all law enforcement officers. The initiative, championed by a coalition of advocacy groups Maya helped lead, emphasized empathy, cultural competence, and de-escalation techniques. Officers were required to undergo regular evaluations to ensure compliance, with independent oversight boards established to review complaints of misconduct. While critics dismissed these measures as insufficient, proponents hailed them as critical first steps toward dismantling entrenched systems of oppression. Maya's influence extended far beyond policy reform. She became a sought-after speaker, traveling the country to share her story and inspire others to join the fight for justice. Universities invited her to deliver keynote addresses, community centers hosted workshops led by her, and corporations enlisted her expertise to develop diversity and inclusion programs. Everywhere she went, Maya brought authenticity and vulnerability to her message, reminding audiences that progress required courage, persistence, and unity. Her advocacy also opened doors for mentorship opportunities, particularly for young women of color aspiring to careers in public service or leadership roles. Recognizing the importance of representation, Maya launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering underserved youth. Through scholarships, internships, and career development programs, the initiative provided resources and guidance to help participants overcome barriers and achieve their goals. Many of the program's graduates credited Maya with changing the trajectory of their lives, citing her unwavering support and belief in their potential as pivotal turning points. Despite her growing prominence, Maya never lost sight of her roots. She returned frequently to her hometown, where neighbors greeted her with warm hugs and heartfelt gratitude. Local businesses displayed posters bearing her image alongside messages of solidarity, while schools incorporated her story into curriculums focused on social justice. Even the pharmacy where the incident began transformed into a symbol of resilience. Its owners painted a mural on the building's exterior, featuring Maya's portrait alongside quotes about perseverance and equality. As time passed, Maya found solace in small moments of joy, things she once took for granted but now cherished deeply. She rekindled her love for painting, filling canvases with vibrant colors that reflected her renewed sense of purpose. Family dinners became sacred rituals, offering laughter and connection amid the chaos of activism. And though physical therapy left her shoulder permanently weakened, she embraced activities like yoga and swimming, finding peace in movement and mindfulness. Yet even in moments of happiness, Maya carried the weight of her experience. Nightmares still haunted her sleep, and certain sounds, like the sharp crack of fireworks or the distant wail of sirens, triggered flashbacks. Counseling remained a constant in her life, helping her navigate the lingering effects of trauma. But rather than viewing these challenges as weaknesses, she saw them as reminders of her humanity, a testament to the strength it took to rise each day and continue fighting. By the fifth anniversary of the shooting, Maya's legacy had grown exponentially. Memorials honoring victims of police violence included her name, alongside those who had lost their lives, celebrating her survival as a testament to resilience. Documentaries chronicling her journey premiered at film festivals worldwide, earning accolades for their unflinching portrayal of systemic injustice. Textbooks featured her story as a case study in advocacy, inspiring future generations to question authority and challenge inequity. Perhaps most importantly, Maya witnessed firsthand how her efforts contributed to cultural shifts within law enforcement itself. Younger officers influenced by reforms in public discourse approached their work with greater awareness and humility. Community policing initiatives gained popularity, fostering trust between residents and authorities. And while biases persisted, conversations about race and privilege became more commonplace, signaling gradual but undeniable progress. Looking back on her journey, Maya acknowledged that she hadn't achieved everything she set out to do, and likely never would. Justice, she realized, wasn't a destination but a continuous process requiring vigilance and collaboration. Yet she took pride in knowing she had planted seeds of change, nurturing them until they blossomed into something larger than herself. On a quiet evening years later, Maya stood on a stage bathed in soft golden light, addressing a crowd gathered to celebrate the launch of her memoir. The book detailed her experiences, from her military career to the night that changed her life forever, and offered reflections on healing, advocacy, and hope. As she scanned the sea of faces before her, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for surviving but for thriving despite everything she had endured. "This isn't my victory alone," she said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "It belongs to every person who has ever dared to dream of a better world. To every mother who has prayed for her child's safety, to every activist who has marched tirelessly for justice, to every survivor who has found the strength to keep going. Together, we are rewriting history, one step, one voice, one act of courage at a time." The audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she absorbed the moment, aware that her story had touched countless lives. Though scars, both visible and invisible, remained, she wore them proudly as badges of honor. They reminded her of how far she had come and how much farther she could still go. And so, Maya continued her work, driven by the belief that even the smallest actions could create ripples of change. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. As long as there were injustices to confront and voices to uplift, she would stand firm, undaunted, unyielding, and unafraid. For Maya Reynolds, the fight was far from over. It was only just beginning.